I think we've been conditioned as in a society, right, to not look within, right? To fear our emotions, to fear our internal worlds. And that, what that does is it keeps us focused on the external, right? The 3D around us. And we never truly connect with our intuition.
Practical mindfulness that meets you where you are. This is Mindfulness Unscripted. I'm Jon Orsini. So tell me about the eclipse energy. What was going on with that? I don't know much of anything about those things, and you seem very attuned to those things and know what you're talking about. So I'd love to hear about that, the eclipse energy.
Yeah. So we just had, eclipses come in a series of two. So we have the full moon lunar eclipse that just occurred. And in about a week, we're going to have the Aries solar eclipse. So these are cosmic, basically resets or really times when things are going to get shaken up. We're oftentimes evaluating relationships. Oftentimes, patterns will resurface or come into our conscious awareness that we need to shift in a way that we've never seen them before. This one was a lot about reevaluating our relationships because we had at the same time Venus going retrograde, which Venus is all about relationships. So this was coming in at a time to really help us to reflect on, are the relationships in our life currently in alignment? Are they helping us to step into a higher version of ourselves, or are they maybe cementing us into this older version of ourselves that we maybe are outgrowing or that we're not really identifying with anymore? So that was kind of the big theme. And we basically had this like surge of energy coming up and dredging up all of this emotional junk from the past. And it probably felt really overwhelming to a lot of people. It might have really brought up feelings of anxiety or overthinking. And the purpose of this was really to try to force us to get into our physical bodies and to feel what's happening instead of kind of creating this story and identifying with the mental chatter. And it was really helping us to really anchor into some of our spiritual practices that can help us to, like I said, get embodied. So that was kind of the purpose. And with this stuff that was being dredged up, it was a lot of old emotions, like I said, patterns, right? So a really positive tool right now to use is journaling to kind of work with the energies of what's going on right now. So that happened, right? It's almost like this cosmic reset. And there's also this alignment that happens where, sometimes in other areas of our life or in other times, it's easy to just kind of fall into like the status quo of whatever it is that we're doing, even if it's not necessarily like lighting our soul on fire. So this eclipse is really like a cosmic realignment. It's getting us to recommit to our purpose. We might be getting more clarity around what it is that we really want to do. Even if we're already working towards something, it might have been this kind of aha moment where it was like, you know what, like you with your podcast, you're like, I want to do this and I don't care. Like, I'm just going to freaking do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
like those kind of revelations are coming forward. And then maybe for those, just starting out on a path of like wanting to start a business, those areas of awareness may be coming to the surface now. So when we have the solar eclipse next week, that's really going to be more about, stepping into this elevated new timeline. So the lunar eclipse and typically full moons in general, like full moon eclipse is like a full moon on steroids, basically. So they're really all about shedding, releasing, and letting go.
Mm.
And then the solar eclipse is really about this renewal, this rebirth. So it will feel a lot more intense than the typical lunar cycles that we encounter from, just month to month. And it's usually about every 6 months that we experience these potent portals of energy. Sometimes in certain years, there's more. So in 2020, we had 6 eclipses, which checks out with what was happening at that time. There were so many cosmic shifts that were occurring and just so many different changes for, the collective and on an individual level. So it really kind of goes along with like if there was a year of just sudden and dramatic change and upheaval, then it could be likely that there was more eclipses that year than, the typical, four, like
Hmm.
two, one pair and then one pair 6 months later. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the long and short of it. This is an incredible time for a lot of expansion. And within the next 1 to 3 weeks, we're going to be settling into that energy. And we're going to be, if we've been doing that spiritual work and, like I said, this, a week and a half ago was really about doing the shadow work. So if we've been diving into that and really doing the work around that, we're going to notice an up leveling or a new frequency coming in.
Hmm. Beautiful. So you mentioned journaling, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are two things I want to say in relation to this. So you mentioned journaling. Are there particular prompts, like based on what these eclipses can represent to people, like particular prompts that you recommend for people or that you work with? Like specific ways of guiding. You mentioned relationships and different things. Are there particular things that like kind of help guide that process that you like?
Yeah, great question. So, one very kind of broad strokes prompt that can be really helpful right now is what needs to go? Like, what
Mm,
if my life needs to go? And it's really a time right now for stream of consciousness journaling. So, stream of consciousness journaling is super helpful because it's not that like we're not trying to filter anything. We're just writing whatever is coming to mind and really engaging and getting in touch with these parts of ourselves that may be more readily available during this time astrologically that we may try to suppress or we may try to avoid. So oh, like everything's great with my job or everything's great with my relationship, and not really looking any deeper. Like I said, that stuff's really going to start coming up. So the stream of consciousness is really, really helpful during this time. Another thing that's really helpful too is really paying attention to what's going on right now in your dreams, because these messages that are coming through right now are particularly strong. So if you're having dreams about either a particular person or a really vivid dream that you remember when you wake up, it could be a really good idea to just keep a journal by your bed right now and just free write on what the dream was about, and then start asking yourself, what is the meaning here? What am I supposed to be learning from this? What am I supposed to be dissecting from this? Right? Because what will happen is something will play out in a dream, and then if we can kind of journal and get to the root of what it is, it may be exposing a hidden pattern in a past relationship or something
mm,
like that. you
yeah.
know for example, the other night I had a dream that I was driving in this car and one of my old friends ran out into the middle of the street and she just started like yelling at me and she was like, "I'm mad at you for doing this."
Mm,
And I like woke up and I was like, "Wait a minute." And then I just thought about it and I was like, is there something unresolved in this relationship right now that like it's obviously my subconscious is bringing this to the surface. And when I journaled and reflected on it, there was messages in how I was showing up in a leadership capacity. Um, how am I showing up interrelationally with friends, like friendships, and what is the dynamic and role that I'm playing within those relationships? So it can be really telling right now, the dreams. So
mm.
those would be my recommendations.
Cool, cool. What am I ready to get rid of? What has to go? That yeah, there's a book that I love called Inner Work. I don't know if you know that there's this guy, his name is Robert A. Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be confused with Robert Johnson, the incredible blues guitarist, right? But Robert A. Johnson, and he's based in Jungian psychology. And he has this incredible book called Inner Work, which is my favorite book I've ever read on dreams because it wasn't like, if you dream of a tiger, it means this. If you dream of a flower, it means this, or whatever it is, right? Like, it's not like that. It's not prescriptive. It actually gives you a way to break down a lot through journaling as well. Very concrete ways to break down through journaling, ways to interpret your own dreams and what they mean to you,
Mm-hmm.
because like the way that a tiger represents itself in your dream
Right.
might be just completely different for every reason of how a tiger might represent themselves in my dream, or so it's just this beautiful book about just kind of helping to decode the symbolism of dreams, the language of dreams, so to speak. And I love all that so much. My biggest issue is I very often don't remember my dreams. Like I know I have them because I'll wake up with a vivid feeling, but I have no connection to the imagery. I can't I'm just like, what is that? Have you ever run into that with people that you worked with or with yourself? Like not if someone doesn't remember their dreams in a sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a very small window that we will remember. So
Mm.
you have to really just kind of have that journal by your bed and just like if you have a vivid dream, grab it and just start writing on it.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it will be gone. It's
Yeah.
just nature of human, like the subconscious.
It's so interesting. I once heard somebody say something along the lines of like when you become more conscious of working with your dreams, you tend to remember them more. Like it's implanted in your brain that you want to remember them. And even just like us talking about it now, like there's a good chance I might remember my dream tonight when I go to sleep.
Mhm.
You know, just
Mhm.
by talking it out and having the
Yeah,
journal by the bed with the intention, hey, if I have a dream, I'm going to write it down on this piece of paper. Like even just doing that, I've heard can help that process.
yeah,
um, it's
that's
so
cool.
it yeah, yeah, it's super interesting. And then so this leads me to another thing. Um, was there anything else about that? Were you gonna say something about?
No, no, I think that that was a really good point, setting the intention, right? And just making it clear, like, this is what I'm hoping to achieve from this experience. Like, I am setting the intention to use any material that's surfacing in my dream state
Yeah,
to reveal anything that needs to be healed, any patterns that I need to work through, any messages that are coming through from my higher self or the divine, and
yeah.
just set that intention and just let it ride.
Beautiful. I'm glad you said that because it just reinforcing the sense of the power of intention. You
Yeah.
know, like I know in the sessions that you do and the sessions that I do as well, like in terms of particularly in my case with the breath specifically with breath work, is like it's so interesting to notice the range of experiences people have, like the wide range of experiences people have. And so much of it is what the individual brings into the space and what they're determined to either address or connect to or whatever it is. And that you set this intention and then you let the thing go. And then again, in the case of breath work, you let the breath just take it from there. And so
Mhm.
it's not like something we also like necessarily with our cerebral, like front of mind logic necessarily always sort through. It's like we can set an intention, let go of it, and then let the process, whatever the process is, whether it's dreams, whether it's breath, right, whatever it is, or journaling, just like let the unconscious start to take it from there. But by
Mhm.
consciously setting the intention, we can bring up so much more than would otherwise present itself just by setting the intention. And yeah, so that's
Absolutely.
cool. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're so powerful. And I really believe that like we have everything that we need within us in order to heal, in
Mhm.
order to make the decisions that we need to make. The answers are all within us. It's just a matter of asking the right questions to access them.
Right. Very well said. That's why I was so curious about the journal thing specifically, because I think a lot of times people hear about meditation or they hear about journaling or they have these, you know, there's like concepts of things that could be helpful, but
Mhm.
without the specifics, it's like, well, where to even begin? Or even when we do get specific, sometimes in this age of, right, the internet, there's too much information. So it's like this journal prompt, that one, that one, that one, that one.
Right.
And
Right.
then, you know, we get like decision fatigue or analysis paralysis or whatever the clever sayings are. You know what I mean? Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I love stream of consciousness journaling because it's just you and whatever's going on within you and just raw, pure honesty. And I find that when we're connecting with that part of ourselves, it's like some sort of higher, like guidance. It could be our higher selves, right? It kind of takes over and you really just kind of get into this flow and you start asking yourself the right questions in order to get to the root. And it's
hmm,
just a really powerful way to get in touch with our inner worlds. So,
yeah.
yeah, I love that, you brought that up. I think it's a great question.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah, there's a sense of like wildness or rawness or spontaneity in what we can do with journaling because it's not even out loud. No one's listening, right?
Mhm.
But then if we can bring that into how we um communicate, right? Allow a sense of like what I'm getting at is a connection to intuition. Like
Mhm.
so you mentioned higher self or wherever these things come from, astrology, faith in some sort of divinity or whatever, wherever it comes from, everybody has access to a deeper sense of intuition. And the thing
Yes.
is, I think, and I'll speak for myself, but I would imagine this resonates with people. If you consider yourself a highly logical person, which I have learned through my own journey is sometimes a defense mechanism more than it is an actual practical, useful thing,
Mhm,
although it's disguised as that.
mhm,
But when you are a highly logical person, it it's hard sometimes to let ourselves just trust a spontaneous intuition or just trust I'm just going to sit in this journal and let words just dump out, right?
mhm,
And just trust that I can go for that ride for the sake of going for the ride for no other reason, and trust that when I look back on it, or that when I just even let myself feel what I'm feeling, that some, like, whether it's just like a tiny kernel or a seed gets planted,
mhm.
all the way up to some major breakthrough, but that it's like the idea of just letting ourselves be intuitive and spontaneous for the sake of being intuitive and spontaneous opens up worlds of transformation, right? Like it opens up a whole different world to us just by our willingness to be spontaneous and intuitive. And everybody can do it.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think we've been conditioned as in a society, right, to not look within, right? To fear our emotions, to fear our internal worlds. And that what that does is it keeps us focused on the external, right? The 3D around us. And we never truly connect with our intuition because we're just focused on, going to work, doing this, like doing the next task that we have to accomplish. And just focusing so much on the outward that we never really truly know what's going on within us.
Mm.
We never really truly access that deeper wisdom that lives within us. And then we never really understand energetically what's going on with us, right? For so long, I never really understood like when I was depleted or when I needed certain things. And now I feel like I'm very tapped into like, okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit drained. Like, let me do a practice or, let me take a pause here and just recalibrate my frequency. Never was that a thought. You
Mm.
know what I mean? And it was not until I started really going within and learning what was going on, within me that I was able to kind of access these deeper states of intuition and awareness. So
Yeah.
it's so important. And I think, just like I said, as a society, we're so conditioned away from that and almost to fear our emotions. But emotions are really just powerful messengers. They carry with it information. And if we know how to work with them, then we can transmute them and come back to a place of presence and love, and also gain really important information about what it is, like how we need to move forward, what
Yeah.
it is that's really going on inside of us so that we can transcend what's going on inside of us, working with the emotional material in service to our spiritual awakening instead of suppressing and avoiding it.
That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so I just like to try to encourage people because I need constant encouragement myself just to trust intuition, because sometimes it feels like, am I just guessing? Is this just silly? It's like, well, if you're getting some kind of information that could be interesting or helpful, just start pulling the thread and see where it goes.
Yep.
And so often it goes somewhere very rewarding and like really beautiful, like you're saying, like connecting and finding love and it just like within ourselves and of course with others. And um so that's beautiful. It's a beautiful practice, even if it feels random at first. That's the point I want to make here to like anyone listening or whatever, just that, like, even if it feels random to follow your intuition or random to be like, well, this seems interesting, or maybe that's what this means, like explore it, explore the impulse. The impulse is not coming from nowhere, right? It's
Yes.
not coming
Yep.
from nowhere. And I will
Yep.
say something very concrete that I've been hearing about lately, which is, you know how birds migrate south,
Mhm.
right? So they have like an internal compass. They don't use a freaking literal compass and a map.
Right.
Birds feel which way south is and they know to fly that way. They have a magnet, like a magnetism within them that responds to the earth, and they could feel which way south is, right? Like a literal internal compass. Apparently, it's been provable that humans have that as well to some degree, right?
Mhm.
But that from not using it, just like anything else, it atrophies. So we
Mhm.
don't have that, for a lot of modernized, domesticated, like overly domesticated humans, like we lose touch with that, but it's there. It's
Mhm.
actually there. So when we get these glimpses of deeper intuition, they can be just as scientific as anything,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
I find really cool. And then the last one about that is the telepathy tapes. Have you been hearing about this?
I haven't watched them, but I have been hearing about them. Yeah.
The same. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I've been hearing about it, and I'm very excited because it's a just to say it's about, as my understanding, it's about nonverbal autistic
Mhm.
kids, I think, or people that clearly have telepathic ability that is like it's clearly shown. Though like that there's like something in another room next door, and that the person is able to know what is in that room without physically
Mhm.
being able
Mhm.
to see it. They can see it somehow. Um, and anyway, so all these things just to say that I'm so excited because there's like emerging science, like provable science behind these things, which is very exciting. All coming back to trust your instincts, right? Like, I mean, we can all do it.
Yeah, yeah, it's so powerful. Is that the video that the kids were basically astral projecting or astral traveling and meeting up on a hill somewhere together? And is that the one that you're talking about?
It
I
might
think
be.
you're telling me about that.
Yeah, it might be that. I mean, it's certainly about that exactly. And that even God, what was the I think it was a movie called Men Who Stare at Goats, maybe it was called. Um, I don't remember enough about it, but anyways, there was this movie and it was essentially, I think it was a dark comedy, but it definitely was a comedy about the military trying to invest in people doing that remote viewing,
Mhm.
right? This or astral projection, as you say, like that kind of thing, and that the military was actually investing money in. And I always find this interesting because I'll say this to people I work with: if breath work didn't foundationally change things for your body and nervous system, right? If breath work wasn't tangibly profound in what it can do for you,
Mm.
then why does the military teach snipers, teach people from all types of military, but snipers especially that need steady hands and like a true focus? Why does the military invest so much in teaching breath work to soldiers, to Marines, right? To people, right? Like, why would they invest in it so much if it wasn't like it's literally life or death situations and they're
Yeah.
teaching breath work to people? Yeah, it works. You know what I mean? So in the same way, this remote viewing, there must be enough behind it because that movie made fun of I think the process, if as I remember, or maybe try or whatever. I don't know, but I don't, because it seems so ridiculous. But the military wouldn't be investing in money in stuff unless they had a really strong idea about there must be something to this. So I find that pretty interesting.
Oh, absolutely. There's absolutely something to that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So another question I want to ask you about surrounding journaling. You mentioned shadow work, like yeah, a little earlier on in the conversation. You mentioned shadow work. So I personally, I have this notebook, this journal, and it's a guided. Speaking of journal prompts, it's a guided prompt to help explore shadow. But
Mm.
the whole idea of shadow is that it's unconscious, and so how do we make the unconscious conscious? Or like,
Mm.
Carl Jung talks about until we make the unconscious conscious, it'll direct our life, and we'll call it fate. Right? There's
Yeah.
this whole thing, and I hear that, and I'm like, oh God, I gotta make my unconscious conscious. Like, what the hell? And but it's tricky work. And even when I hear shadow, we hear this all the time: shadow work, shadow, or address your shadow, or whatever. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because like I sometimes I feel like, okay, I sort of get it, but I still don't really get it in terms of like, how do I actually tangibly work on this?
Yeah, that's such a good question and very relevant because I think a lot of people feel the same way. And I know that I used to as well. So, this is how I approach it. Anytime that I'm disturbed, shall I say, by an interaction with somebody, um, I feel almost like a burning, twingy sensation in my heart. And I know if I'm rethinking about it, oh my God, I can't believe they did that.
Mm,
How could they have done that? That is so rude. Like, and then I catch myself doing that and revisiting that. That to me is an indication that there's something within me that needs to be looked at.
mm,
So every time I try to project something onto somebody else, some sort of uh, unconscious material, I'll call it, onto somebody else through blame or judgment or criticism. That means basically, if I'm looking at reality as a mirror, reality is mirroring back to me something that needs to be healed. So I look at that as a resentment, something underlying, something that's going on. And I start to ask myself different questions about it. So it could be, how am I showing up in the same way that this person is upsetting me in other relationships? So if I feel that this person is being so judgmental, they're talking negatively about other people. I take that as a opportunity to look at myself of, okay, where am I maybe acting in this way? Am I judging some of my close friends or maybe my sister, or where am I being judgmental, right? That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is to kind of get a little bit more granular in the sense of, am I, what behaviors am I attributing in this dynamic? So am I coming off as selfish? Am I being passive aggressive? Right. And it takes radical honesty. It's not an easy thing to do because, a lot of the times it's easy, right? It's easier to point the finger at somebody else. And I know I'm guilty of it, very much so, right? But the growth really lies in being able to put that aside and use it as material. It's really just trying to show us where we can grow along spiritual lines. So that's one way. And then the other way to look at it is fears. So, what's coming up for me right now that I feel resistance towards doing or I'm avoiding doing, right? Something that I want to be doing, but I'm not actively taking the steps. So, what is the fear there, right? And then, why am I afraid of it? So, really kind of getting clear on what the fear is, the why. And then I like to ask myself, what is this costing me? What is operating from the mode that this fear is true costing me in my life? And it could be I'm not fully standing in my fullest expression, and I'm not really putting myself out there in the ways that I need to be in order to, start a business, or maybe I want a relationship and I'm, afraid to really be vulnerable and seen in front of somebody else. So these are kind of the things that, I recommend starting to look at. And again, journaling, super, super helpful. But what happens is, unexamined, right? We kind of just run on these fears and we don't even realize that they're controlling us. And until we kind of start, looking at them and facing them. And, that's a great part about fear is that, instead of looking at it, for anybody that's listening, instead of looking at it as, okay, like this is where I need to stop. Like fear is, okay, I'm afraid, I'm going to turn around and, go back the other way. Looking at fear as the gas pedal. Fear
Mm,
just means that we're on the brink of something unknown.
mm,
We're on this new uncharted territory. And so it's actually an indication to move toward that thing instead of resisting it and pulling away.
mm.
And that's really, really helpful, especially if you're interested in, growth and expansion and creating something new and different in your life, facing those fears and moving beyond them. And it doesn't have to be this huge, leap, although sometimes it could be. But sometimes it might just look like, I feel really uncomfortable like talking to people that I don't know. So maybe I'm just going to make a goal to even just, say hello to somebody at the grocery store and just ask how their day is going, and just take it very slow. But I think as long as we're taking those little baby steps toward the fear and not letting it control us, and like Carl Jung said, right, those unconscious fears are huge if left unexamined, and they will control our lives. So it's
Mhm.
a really powerful practice to uncover what they are and then begin to face them.
That's cool. That sounds amazing. And it's also practical, which is awesome. And like you said, Carl Jung, the cave we fear to enter holds the treasure we seek.
Yeah,
Right. And
really.
then another one that came to mind with that was I once heard, and obviously as you also are in with, work with breath and everything, especially that fear is simply excitement without the breath.
Mm, I love
Right.
that.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
this resonates so much with everything you're saying. And so like in a yogic sense too, especially lately, I've been reading a lot about the idea that if we have a certain energy, right? Say it's fear, for instance, as we're talking about. So if you're sitting with that in some sort of meditation or even just sitting with it, letting yourself be aware of the feeling of fear, right? Fear is inherently considered, I would say, quote unquote, negative, right? Like a
Mhm.
negative feeling. Um, it could feel restrictive, it could feel suffocating, it feels scary, right? But if we remove, first of all, the judgment
Mhm.
around what fear is, but then also even any concept around what fear even means, if we remove any thinking around what fear is and feel it just as pure energy, it's
Mm,
actually a strong force. Like you're saying, it's like it gives you a way forward. It's showing
yeah.
you something because fear is energy. It's actually a lot of energy in cases, right? So, that we can direct that energy and maybe it's telling us to move in a certain direction if we examine it, which is really cool. And then I also like how you said very practically about in what ways are, like a very common way to put it these days is triggered. Like, are you
Mhm.
triggered? So I've
Yep.
heard that put different ways, like triggered, activated,
Hmm.
like when something like you said, you describe the feeling that you get if you're around somebody or they say a certain or do a certain thing, whatever. And what does that tell you about you? And oh God, that's a whole other thing. We don't even have to go down the rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
I was like just thinking this morning about like this whole, this idea about like embody the change you wish to see, right? And
Hmm.
how often, and again, we don't have to go down the road with this. I'll just say that I just want to say this simple thing about it because I was thinking about it this morning. Um, is like when you're feel like how often I see people who claim to want like a kinder, more connected world.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, so what does it look like if you embody kindness and connection? What does that look like, right?
Hmm.
Versus people who, and I'm speaking broadly here generally, but as a concept, people who say they want to or present that they want a kinder, more connected world, but they're actually displaying the opposite in their behavior and the way they communicate and how they treat other people, right? You know what I mean? And I find that so interesting. So when you talk about shadow, that stands out a lot to me, especially, I always would, but especially right now in like the contentious climate we're in and this and that, it's like, you can use those activations, those triggers as indicators of like, so what's going on with me? Because guess what? You also don't have control of other people. You know what
Right.
I mean? But you
Right.
can examine like, well, what's getting triggered in me? And sometimes it's pure injustice and that needs to be addressed. There's no doubt about that. But in other cases, there are activations that can reveal things to us about ourselves that can make our lives tangibly better if we can address and examine them. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, it's almost like if we can use it as a mirror and have a perspective shift around it when it's like when I start kind of going into that pointing the finger outside, it really gives our power away. And
Mm,
when I can take it back to address whatever is going on within me, then I can shift my perspective, right? And then I can get myself back into alignment. And then I have my power back, right? Because I
mm,
make the decisions that I need to make. I can make the changes that I need to make within me or within my life. And it's really just highlighting, right? Like, ooh, like there's some juicy material here for me to work with and expand and grow through. So
mm,
I think just having that little shift in perspective of when something is disturbing us with like out in the external world, just looking at it as a means of using it to grow.
mm. Beautiful. Do you have a dog? I just heard them bark.
I do. And he's going to keep barking unless I let him in the room. Is it
Let him
okay?
in. Yeah, let him in. Let's meet
He's
him. He's so tiny.
I know he's my baby.
What's his name?
This is Rocky,
Rocky. Hey. Hi,
Shih Tzu.
Rocky.
Yeah.
Nice. He's super cute.
He
Black and
is.
white. So cute.
Yeah, he's a good boy.
Oh, nice.
He's a barker though.
Hmm. Well, we all have to like get our needs met. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like, that's
Oh,
cool.
he demands it and requires it. There's no
Beautiful.
gray area there. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's the way to do it, Rocky. Um, so that's great. So addressing the shadow. So now here's a question for you. This is a specific thing, right? So in my like, there's a particular thing that I try to work with that I'm not even really sure how to. But how would you? So fear is really interesting. The activation and the triggers are really interesting, as we've been talking about.
Hmm.
And then what about like, so for instance, I wonder, like, I'll just be very specific. When I was in college, this reminds me of something you said earlier too. When I was in college, I had like the bullet points, panic attacks. And
Hmm.
I talk about this sometimes in my breathwork sessions because breathwork is how I stopped having panic attacks. But the very first thing I did, which was a very concrete action to take, because I recognized, there's a lot of layers to what was going on, but one of them was a kind of a social anxiety which I
Mm,
never had before. I grew up in the town I grew up in Connecticut, and I had my friends and all that. And then I went to college in Boston, and I was surrounded by all these new people, and like I loved Boston, I loved the city, I loved all that, but I was like really nervous about like how do I just talk to people I don't even know? And there was a lot of other stuff to it too, but that was one concrete thing I could identify as something I was struggling with. So what
mm,
I did was I was like, all right, so how do I pragmatically and concretely address this? Um, and what I did was every time I was in an elevator, I had to say something if someone was in the elevator. I had to
mm,
say something, period. So it could, and it was great because it could be an older person, it could be a younger person, it could be someone that I might feel more comfortable talking to just for any reason, or it might be someone I'd feel like I don't know what to say to this, like, you know, 65-year-old man in a suit that I mean, I don't know what I would say to him and or whatever it is, right? So it was a great equalizer and a great way to challenge myself and to say, hey, I could just say, oh, those are nice shoes. Thank you. That's it, right? Like I just had to say something. So that helped me get over the fear of thinking something catastrophic would happen if I talked to a person I didn't know or something, right? So that
mm,
was good. But so that was the first bit. But the main bit is that I had the social anxiety. So like I went from having a lot of friends and having fun in high school and like enjoying my life and feeling like I was like living to going in college and being like locked in a room and watching old French films. You know what I mean? Or just like reading Jack Kerouac, like his Jack Kerouac books over and over again. And I was just so anti-social when I really didn't want to be. Like I loved learning and I loved those things. But I wanted to be like out in the world. I wanted to be meeting friends. I wanted to be going to parties and all that stuff. But like again, high school, great. College, I was just like a shell, locked in a room. And so, anyways, as it pertains to now getting older, I was like insisting. I was talking to this therapist one time, and I was like, I have Peter Pan syndrome. I just want to be young again, and I just want to do that. And he was like, John, you do not have Peter Pan syndrome. And like he had to keep talking me out of it because I was trying to tell him that I did, and he was like, no, that's not the problem. But then I was like, what is the problem? So this is all to say, if you have a sense of feeling around, I don't know if like whatever the things may be, and I would love to hear your reflections on it, but like a sense of like regret or a sense of missing out or a sense of like not being who you could have been and feeling like either time passed or that wherever you're at in your life right now, you feel like you're not where you should be and you're wondering like if there's things from your shadow that are holding that back.
mm,
Um, so I know that's broad and I'm opening that up, but do you get anything from that? Because I don't know if fear's probably wrapped up in there somewhere.
mm,
But not, you know what I mean? Like that's a
mm,
broad one, but like for people who are wondering let me put it this way. If a person, for whatever the reason, is wondering what's holding them back, like they feel held back, but they don't know what's holding them back,
mhm,
how, are there ways to approach that if you're like just so vague on being like, well, how do I even address that?
mm. Well, I think that that's a really great place to start asking yourself, right? What do you think it is that's holding you back? And free writing on that and just seeing what
Mm,
comes up. And that can be incredibly telling. And if it's guilt from the past, if I showed up in a certain way that I either am not proud of or I wish that I had done differently, or it just isn't aligned with the person that I am today, I would say that, you know, it's important to work on self forgiveness, right? Because we're always doing the best that we can with the knowledge and the resources and the understanding and the level of consciousness that we're at.
mm,
So, many, many years ago, right? If you had the information and the wisdom and the knowledge that you have today, you would have acted differently, right? So, a lot of the time, it can come down to what I call, and this is what it's usually called by other people too, is parts integration. So, oftentimes we'll have parts of ourselves that from the past. Usually, it can be an inner child, but it can be any aspect of you. We all have an inner teen and an inner child and a past version of ourself that may be holding on to these feelings. So it can be really helpful to go back in meditation and connect with that part and almost reparent it or tell that part of you what it really needs to hear. So if there's guilt and shame coming up, channeling that part and talking to that part and finding out what it really needed to hear in that moment. Maybe now it needs encouragement and validation of, you know what, like that time in our life was really hard. And I'm so proud of you for, getting through that and look at all of the beautiful things that we've accomplished today. And, really just kind of going back and giving that part love and acceptance is usually what we need to do. And, really taking the lesson of what it is that you learned from that time, because I think that there's always lessons. And if we're learning the lessons and integrating the lessons from the past, then we don't make the same mistakes again, right? Because I think it can be really frustrating when, sometimes we get in these like loops, right? And it's like we're kind of making similar mistakes over and over again, whether that's in relationships or usually, right, with like a romantic relationship, that's kind of where it will show up heavy. And so if we can really start kind of digging in and learning the lesson, I think that that's one of the most powerful questions. I know for me, like, what am I meant to learn from this? What is this trying to show me? And uncovering that, right? And then, okay, maybe this is trying to teach me that, I need to trust the universe, or maybe this is teaching me that I need to have more patience with myself and, really trusting that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And maybe that's why I'm kind of, sitting here and not a lot is happening from my perspective, right? But I have to trust that things are going on behind the scenes that I can't necessarily see right now, and trusting the bigger picture of when things are going to unfold. So I think always extracting the lesson is important, and then releasing the guilt, because we can't change the past, right? We can only learn from it. So going back and beating ourselves up, it only keeps us stuck in this loop, right? Because when there's guilt and shame, it creates this holding pattern, and it's really difficult to move forward. So the only thing that really breaks that in my experience is self-love and self-acceptance. If I can accept myself and love myself and know that I'm always doing the best that I can, not like as an excuse to never evolve, but it's just we're always just doing the best that we can in this present moment, while like attempting to learn the lessons and grow and expand. But we can never be somewhere that other than where we are, right? Like that was something that was so important for me to understand, because for so long I was always so frustrated with myself. I wish I was further along, right? I wish that this was happening and this was happening and this was happening. But the truth is, I'm here where I am exactly in this moment for very particular reasons, right? God, the universe, the divine has orchestrated this for a very particular reason, because I have certain lessons that I need to learn. I have to embody and integrate certain truths. And the universe has orchestrated things perfectly in this moment for me to be able to learn what I need to learn in order to carry out my specific divine destiny. And we're always on, we're on human time, which is, time constraints, right? But the soul is eternal. So the soul's not really in a rush. The soul is really looking to learn and grow and love and experience and be present. The ego wants status and achievement, and I have to be here by this time, and I need, a wife and kids and a beautiful house, and I need to be this far along in my business by this age. That's all ego, you know? So I notice like when that's coming up, I just have to like redirect myself, and I'm like, no, okay, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I trust the universe. I trust that it's all going to unfold exactly when it's supposed to. I'm on divine timing. Like, we got this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful. And it makes a lot of sense. And something that resonates strongly too is that this idea of self-compassion, right?
mhm.
Because I will be the first person to say, whenever I started to hear like self-compassion, I'd be like, F that, like whatever, in the sense that it's like, why? Oh, so I could just be super patient with myself. It's like the problem is I'm impatient for, like whatever it is, like for a reason, right? Or whatever. I'm trying to get something done, or I'm trying to take care of something, right?
Mhm.
Something that I found to be a radical breakthrough about self-compassion is like usually the opposite of that is that we're judging ourselves, right?
Mhm.
And when
Yep.
we judge, whether it's ourself or someone else or something, judgment clouds reality
Mhm.
inherently. Like either, whether you want to consider judgment good or bad doesn't even matter. The point is that you can't see clearly when you are judging something. Like it inherently removes the ability to see it clearly. And if you want to deal with something, if you want to improve something, if you want to achieve something, whatever, like you have to be able to see clearly to do it the most efficient way. And so even for me, that was very much like self-compassion. Yeah, that sounds very lovely. That's so nice. You know what I mean? Like, and it just wasn't enough. Um, for me, hopefully it's enough for you. Hopefully it's enough for everybody in the world. I hope that for everybody. But even if it isn't enough, it's like, okay, well, how about this? If you can't see it clearly, you can't be as effective. And in order to be effective, you got to remove the judgment. And then
Mm-hmm.
you end up right back at self-compassion again, you know what I mean? But from a different avenue. And hopefully that avenue resonates, if the other one doesn't on its own, because they're, you know, the self-compassion and the non-judgment is one and the same, the clarity.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think once we remove that, like I said, the self-blame and the self-judgment, it keeps us stuck. Like we think it's going to do the opposite. We think judging ourselves and criticizing ourselves is going to force us to change, but
Mm,
it actually just keeps us stuck.
mm,
So when looking to break a pattern, I think it's really is important to have radical self-honesty. So, and sometimes that's really hard. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, I see something in me and I'm just like, like
yeah.
what? But then I have to really just be patient with myself and know that these are lifelong patterns, right? That we're working to break. And it's not comfortable to do that. And sometimes things are going to come forward that are not pretty and they don't fit into a really nice, pretty bow and box. And it might not feel good to look at. But I think it's important to kind of remember that, we've kind of come into this world and received this conditioning, right? Like our parents, society, school, right? And so I think a large part of, becoming an adult and walking a spiritual path is unlearning
Mm,
a lot of that stuff. So I think if it's hard to have self-compassion, taking the mindset that it's not your fault, right? But it's our responsibility to heal. So it's
mm,
like, yeah, I've adopted some, everybody comes into this world with unhelpful thought patterns and trauma a lot of the time. And so it's not that, you've done this to yourself or anything. That's not a good way to look at it. I think it's helpful to just, like I said, say, it's not my fault what happened to me, but it's my responsibility to heal.
mm,
And it's also a way for me to love myself, right? To really address the things that are holding me back from standing in my fullest expression and living the life that I want to live. So it's
mm,
really doing yourself such a major service by, going within and looking at these patterns. And even though it feels challenging sometimes, that's why it is so important to have that self-compassion. And
mm,
to also know, I think sometimes we can think that, we're so much worse than other people or like there's something inherently wrong with us, right? And it's like, no, like we all have, unhelpful patterns. Like every
mm,
single person on this planet has patterns that are not serving them.
mm,
Most of us have had trauma that can skew the way that we see the world, right? And it's not about beating ourselves up. It's about freeing ourselves and liberating ourselves so that we can see the truth.
beautiful. Yeah, no, I love that so much. And as kind of like in my mind, the way that I kind of take all that and then process it is to say, you know, when you hear all this, like do this work or do this journaling or all this stuff and the healing and all that stuff, it's like who wants to get into that? It's so much easier to just drink ourselves
Yeah.
into a stupor and stay in the same crappy job or in a relationship that it's not actually aligned with who we are. It's who we think we're supposed to be or whatever the thing is. And so it's like, why do all this stuff? It's like because your life will be immeasurably better when we address these things, even if it's uncomfortable at times, or even if it's uncomfortable at first, as we like peel back layers of who am I versus who have I been conditioned to be, right? A lot of times we think we are one thing, but it's actually all cultural conditioning or mostly cultural conditioning. And when you can break down those layers, like everything you're saying, it's like, why, oh, why get into all this stuff? Like, this is a lot of work. It's like, yeah, to have a better life. Like, again, like what's better than an amazing relationship? Like, what's
Right.
better than being in an amazing relationship? What's better than genuinely tasting your food? You know what I mean? What's better than walking outside and rather than being all stuck in your emails and a bunch of bullshit, you actually like see the clouds in the sky and just notice them moving. Like, what's
Mhm.
better than living that kind of life? And that's what we're doing, you know? So to anybody who's like resistant or just being like, what the hell, this sounds like a lot, or, you know, whatever, it's like, yeah, but like the life that you can truly enjoy is on the other side. It's all part of the process. So, um,
Yeah.
I always like to speak to that. So great. So the last thing I want to do here is, um, so you're in Connecticut. You
Mhm.
do a spiritually based life coaching, energy healing, and obviously breath work. That's how, you know, we had met.
Mhm.
So in the work that you do, like, do you share things online? You do things in person? So anything about like your work you want to share or where you're coming from with the work?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm really here to help my clients clear energetic blocks, to trust their intuition, and really to step into their fullest potential and activate their highest timeline. And I do that through energy work and also intuitive life coaching. So I guide my clients to really reconnect with their true selves and to find clarity and also to create a life that feels aligned, right? I really focus on soul alignment with my clients. And what that means to me is living a life that you truly feel resonates with your spirit, right? And this is why, doing the work that we were just talking about is so important. Uncovering and discarding that mental conditioning and getting in touch with your soul. And I believe that my work is so powerful because, energetically we get stuck and mentally we get stuck, right? There's two different places that we can get stuck. And as you know, as a breathwork facilitator, if we have energy somatically that's holding us back, we can do all the mindset work that we want. But if we don't liberate that energy from our energy field, then we're going to kind of get stuck in that same holding pattern. And I find that this is particularly true for trauma, right? I really feel from my own experience and witnessing it with clients, once we liberate that energy from our bodies, we can finally start to move forward. So I help people remove not only the mental blocks, but also the energetic blocks that are preventing them from moving forward in this life and past lives as well. I do a lot of past life karmic clearing, and it's fascinating and wild how we are oftentimes stuck in similar patterns with the same souls from across multiple lifetimes. And I've seen it many times where there's a pattern playing out with a certain person in one of my clients' lives, and I get in there and start doing the work, and I start having these visuals come up of they're in the same dynamic in a past life in mid-century Europe doing the
Mm.
same shit with that same person. And so once we clear that energy, I've had clients, you know, come back and report that I see things differently now. Like I'm seeing things from a different perspective, and I'm able to make a decision that's not based in that old energy anymore. I've cleared and transmuted that energy, and I can see things differently now. And maybe I need to walk away from that person.
Mm.
This you know karmic link is the soul contract in this life is done. So there's just so much that we can get into with energy. And, then also kind of getting into the intuitive coaching, I will just help clients based on what I feel is going on with them, if any patterns are surfacing that we may need to work with, to really just help them to become empowered to take the steps that they want to take in their life. That, there may be some sort of subconscious sabotaging going on, or self-doubt. We work through all of those things in sessions as well. So yeah, together we really create a space for healing and growth and aligned action.
That's fantastic. Super cool. And what's the best way to follow along with what you're doing and to be in touch, like social media or website or different
Mhm.
ways to be in touch with you?
Yep. So my website is healingwithstephaniejanis.com. So you can contact me that way. I'm also on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is cosmic2_lotus. So I'm
Hmm.
on there as well. And then if you're local to the Connecticut area, I also host new moon and full moon energy healing circles around Connecticut. I'm usually at the Salt Cave of Darien, and then Yoga Shala, which is in Fairfield, Connecticut. So
Nice.
southwestern Connecticut. Yep.
That's awesome. Cool. I'm so glad you shared. And there were like 10 other things I wanted to talk about. So we'll just have to talk more sometime. And yeah, thank you again so much for taking the time. It was an awesome conversation and also pragmatic, which is always my favorite thing. So it was great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah.
Check out more at Mindfulness Unscripted on YouTube and Spotify, Instagram at Jon Orsini, jonorsini.com for in-person events, Zoom sessions, and more. I'll see you next time.